Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar titled Treasury and Receivables, Value of a Comprehensive View. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we're pleased you could join us as we discuss the power of an end-to-end view that considers not only internal parties, but also external partners. Our speakers for today are Rick Scholes, Managing Director, Payment Advisory Services at Deluxe, and Craig Jeffrey, Founder and Managing Partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Craig and Rick, and I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to be here. Thanks for getting everything introduced. Rick, I'm glad to be on this webinar with you. We are in the same room in our studio in Atlanta, Peachtree City, and so thanks for joining me today.
I've been so looking forward to this, and we've done a number of these together, but this is takes it to another level.
Yeah, it's excellent. And thanks everybody for joining. We know there's so many things that you can do during the day. The fact that you'd spend some time discussing Treasury and receivables is an encouragement to us, and we appreciate it. What are we going to cover today? So you can see the agenda on your screen. We'll look at the cash conversion cycle, or CCC. So that's the entire process of where cash is injected into the business cycle. So let's say it goes into inventory or makes its way through receivables. You're investing in receivables as you sold things, all the way through payables, this conversion back and forth. And so we'll look at receivables, payables, and treasury. And those are some of the different areas that impact the cash conversion cycle. There's certainly some different drivers. We'll look at a few of those. We're going to focus on receivables and treasury, primarily receivables today. And there can be different drivers, different views. We'll talk about key performance indicators. Sometimes those can be just naturally the way they occur. And sometimes we can set up drivers and measurements and key performance indicators that are at odds with one another. They can be competing. And anytime that's occurring, we're in a suboptimal position, a suboptimal environment. So we want to make sure that the entire process works, which brings us to the full end-to-end view. How many organizations take a comprehensive look from the start of a process to the end of the process? I think we're all quite good at looking at what's in our particular span of control and trying to optimize within that. But we'll examine this more comprehensive, or an end-to-end look, and why that matters so much for efficiency, liquidity, in our processes, and particularly in the payment processes, which is our third area. We'll look at some of the challenges and the solutions that are necessary to allow an organization to scale and to run efficiently. So we'll look at efficiency, liquidity, and also visibility. Those have an impact on the receivables group, on treasury groups, and even on the AP side of things. And then finally, for our key takeaways, final thoughts, Rick and I will touch on a few areas about coming to alignment across the different areas, as well as an end-to-end perspective, that comprehensive look, and then areas and groups, organizations that can lend you assistance in that. Now, that's a lot for our agenda. We've got it covered, and so, Rick, I'll turn it over to you with the cash conversion cycle. So there's a picture of a cycle on there, or a wheel. I'll let you take it from there.
And I'm sure our friends who work in Treasury love this diagram, center of the circle. So how I got interested in this whole set of concepts, just a little bit of history. I shared with Craig earlier today, many years ago was in sales and treasury management, and had a meeting with my treasury contact at a specific company, and arrived at the meeting, and they had included somebody from accounts receivable, somebody from credit and collections, and somebody from their billing group. And I was kind of surprised by all of that. And of course, by the end of the meeting, I thought, wow, this really made a lot of sense. And we got a lot of issues out. So it's been on my mind for years and years and years. And just in the last few years, I think it's come more to the forefront. But anyway, let's just talk a little bit about these, how people are judged and how they view their responsibilities. So, of course, in accounts receivable, we focus on DSO, although I'm finding now more and more folks are de-emphasizing DSO and really kind of focusing more in on specific situations with specific groups of customers or categories of customers. But we definitely focus on DSO. That's how AR people are typically judged. But there's always a drive for efficiency. What better way to decrease DSO than become more efficient? And again, we'll get into some of that push and shove aspect between the various groups that maybe makes that a little bit more complicated than we maybe think it is. There's an impact on customer service and support. So let's think about in AR, if I make a mistake, that mistake kind of cycles through different areas within the company, ultimately makes the customer unhappy. If I don't fix it quickly enough, then that customer is going to continue to be unhappy because his next bill will be wrong, things of that nature. So, but anything that they put in place needs to be scalable. I think many years ago, people didn't worry about the scalability. Anything to fix a problem was how they approach things. But I think we've all learned that lesson, that if we put in a fix that's not scalable, it's really not helping anybody in the process. So that's in general the things that drive people in AR. Treasury, of course, has a whole different set of concerns and things that they're being judged on. So main ones being, of course, working capital and liquidity, which has become, as we enter into a higher interest rate environment, becomes even more important to most companies. Forecasting, we've seen in surveys over the past several years, a continued increase in a focus on forecasting and accurately forecasting. And there are ways, I think, that we can talk a little later about making improvements in that area. Again, scalability. Everybody needs to be concerned about scalability. Treasury really takes on a lot of responsibilities for controls. They're typically the ones that are dealing with the various parts of the company that are concerned with compliance and things of that nature. They're going to be called to task to make sure things that they have policies and procedures in place. And of course, as I mentioned before, they're the ones typically responsible for relationships with banks and vendors. And sometimes, but mostly, handle that on their own and deal with my experience has been over the years that most Treasury folks meet with the banks, because I worked for banks for most of my career, without bringing other people in, counter to the example I used a little bit earlier. And then, of course, we have AP. Now, of course, Treasury, it's important for them to have relationships with both sides, because in order for them to do forecasting and manage their liquidity, they need to not only worry about when is the money coming in, how is the money coming in, but how is that money leaving the organization as well. Of course, the AP side, in my opinion, is a little bit easier because if you have a situation, you can delay a payment. I mean, there may be implications further down the road, but it's a little bit easier to delay an outbound payment than it is to force someone to pay you earlier, and we'll get into that a little bit more later too. But in AP, they have to worry a lot about security and, as with everybody else, scalability. But if AP makes anything that AR in our organization does is going to potentially have an impact on Treasury and AP in someone else's organization. So I like to keep that in mind as well when we get further into the end-to-end conversation. Do you want to add anything?
Rick, you said a lot of really good things. One piece at the beginning really stuck in my head. You said Treasury likes this diagram because Treasury is at the center of the cash conversion cycle. And that's true. And that's something we can see whenever we look at, every time you look at some kind of diagram or process chart, you can tell what the person's bent is because they start with what they know and they put themselves at the center of the heliocentric universe is, very different drawing and perspective than people had for many years. And Treasury is going to do that. And that's really a picture or an image in our minds of this end-to-end view. We can't just look at, oh, this affects Treasury just in terms of how cash comes in from the AR side, or what do we need to fund from the procure to pay side. There's a lot more relations there. And like you said, if Treasury just treats everything as, hey, we just care about liquidity, we're not assisting the other areas. If the other areas sit there as a island unto themselves, they're having a negative impact somewhere else. And so nobody can act optimally without looking across the board. So I thought that was a really, really good point you had made, and as an image for how we think about these things. Right?
And actually, now that we kind of expand that conversation a little, maybe there are people out there who don't like being at the center of that diagram. But yeah, no, good point. The interoperability is an issue. So let's talk a little bit about differences in focus. It's too easy to just say it boils down to a timing issue, although that actually is a big piece of it. Right, so Treasury needs to be concerned about availability of funds pretty much on a daily basis. So, monitoring something over the course of a month isn't really going to help them to do their job on a day-to-day basis. So they need to have that money available, and not just, sitting in the comment there about not being able to spend float. The money needs to actually be available in order for them to use it. And that puts the pressure, if you will, on the accounts receivable organization, and to a certain extent the billing organization, but let's focus on accounts receivable for now, in turning those payments into cash, right? So they need to apply them properly, either at a customer at a minimum or ideally at an invoice level. They need to get those posted as cash as quickly as possible in order to turn it into cash for Treasury to use. Treasury, again, needs to look at this on a day-to-day, if not hourly basis. There are certain situations, certain days that Treasury is going to be concerned about this intraday, not just, especially with all the new payment types, which are faster, puts a little bit more pressure on being able to forecast intraday. Whereas AR is probably it's a metric that they're trying to work towards, which makes it more of a snapshot end of month focus. I like this chart though, Craig. I think this really depicts it well, the difference in the focus there. So it'd be nice to say it's just a timing issue. The timing issue is an important one, but we'll get into more detail as we get through this hour in terms of the other impacts. But it's important. I think people don't think about this timing issue enough. I think it's important to put it up here.
Yeah, and taking measurements for DSO, they're easy to measure. DSO is easy to measure in that you're using the financial statements that are regularly prepared, systematically reviewed, and maintained for a long period of time. So this month-end snapshot, or the averaging between the first and the last day of the month is very easy to create the measurement. But like you can see in that shot where you see the purple line for liquidity dipping below the solid line there, which is an example of what might be level. And so there's a problem with cash. An example of that, when I was working with Treasury before I moved into Treasury, I worked in an area where we made a significant number of payments, and the challenge was the AR group was always hounding to make sure that they got paid. And we found if I targeted most of the payments for 3 days before the last day of the month and then the last day of the month, and we shared the information about what was being paid, the amount of pressure that we had was almost nothing. We moved everything to digital in terms of payments, and all of a sudden they loved us. And it wasn't that we were paying any earlier, it was just we're making sure we're getting in before their cutoff. And we communicated well. Just the communication meant that they could do their forecasting better, and that solved one whole set of problems on their end. But we never really had to pay earlier. We just had to make sure we paid at this time, and that influenced a lot of the my understanding of how different areas are measured. and this snapshot view. So that was very interesting too. So it was just the timing of the month.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of you are wondering how many poll questions do we have? We have 3 slides that have poll questions. You'll see how many there are as they come up. Right now we have a stacked one. There's 2 views and relationships. So there'll be some instructions in the chat box or dialog box that says how you can find it if you're not seeing it. So the first question is, do you have an end-to-end view of your credit and accounts receivable process? So that's within the order to collect that. Is it a full end-to-end view just within that area? And you can see the different options there. And then the last one in our organization, Treasury and AR. There's some questions. We have common or shared goals, different goals, competing goals, communicate regularly, et cetera. So answer all that applies. So there should be 2 sets of questions in that one poll frame. So select those and then go ahead and enter. And for those that are completed, if we get, let's just say 175 people type the word deluxe in the chat box, we'll send all the results of the poll out. So deluxe, looks like everyone's spelling it right, or most people are.
Most people, yeah.
Capital, lowercase, all of that's good. At least you're getting some of the letters together. It'll be great. You can type the word poll too, but deluxe.
Or for those shortcut people like me, you could just do DLX.
There you go. Use the stock symbol. Awesome. Yeah. Well, is there
or the anti-vowel movement that's afoot?
That is. I didn't know that was afoot, but I'll have to read up on that soon. Yeah. So we've got. I'll be really interested to see this as we talk about this end-to-end view and how people look at things within the area or not. 40%. Yeah, interesting. Internal steps for credit, 40%, Rick. 50% for internal steps for AR. And then external steps with customers, 16%. So that's about 1/6 have much more of that end-to-end view there. What are your comments on the bottom section about Treasury and AR?
Trying to still absorb a little bit here.
Well, don't communicate well is 8%. That's pretty low. That seems pretty decent.
I'm encouraged by that. I'm also I'm encouraged by the 61% having common or shared goals. I think that's a big improvement over things that I've seen, over the past several years. I think that I'm very happy to see that, actually. And only 15% with different goals, but 7% with competing goals. Is the competing goals that are the most dangerous, right? Having different goals is actually okay. I would think I'd rather see a higher number and communicate regularly, but it is what it is. But yeah, I mean, those low numbers on the bottom, I think are, don't communicate very well at 8%, I think is encouraging. In general, I think this is good news, I believe.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for responding to our first poll question. We will advance over to this end-to-end view we talked about within credit, within accounts receivable, and what's going on. So this is a question from one of our surveys. Do you have an end-to-end view of your credit and accounts receivable processes? And so this is what the survey results showed. A little bit different from what we saw from the poll of those that are attending. Internal steps for credit, a little over a third, about 2/3 for internal steps for AR across the board. And then external steps with customers, 22%. You may remember that was 16% with our audience here. No, I believe no was lower. I can't remember the percentage, but I'm pretty sure that
I think it was lower, yeah.
Yeah, it was lower. So this audience may be a little bit more tuned to what's going on. Rick, as you look at this, you've long been the end-to-end or this comprehensive view. Any additional comments on where companies are in terms of moving to that end-to-end, which we're about 2/9, 2 out of 9 companies have that end-to-end view currently.
And that's consistent, I think. I mean, the numbers for the participants here was lower, but the previous surveys that I've seen, roughly between 20 and 25%. I think there was an uptick maybe around the time of COVID. I don't know that it had anything to do with COVID, but because I can't actually think of why that would have happened. I actually, just in conversations with corporate customers and with bankers that deal with corporate customers, I think there is an increase in people who are considering including customers in the dialogue on the receivable side. I had a corporate customer a few years ago that actually actively worked with their customers when they were making changes. I mean, that focus was really more on the billing side, to find out from their customers and their salespeople actually, what is wrong with our billing and how could we make our bills and our invoices easier for you to understand and process. And the hope is there that if you can make those changes, then you don't neglect the next step in the process, which is, or the people who post the payments going to be able to deal with those. And they ultimately did incorporate the accounts receivable or the cash application folks in that process before they finalized it. But they've seen a big uptick in, or I should say a downtick, if you will, in the number of exceptions that they have to process or the number of disputes that people come back with. So, I mean, there are examples of success for those companies that do include their customers in that dialogue. So I think, again, this result is pretty flat to what I've seen before, but I think, 20 to 25%, if it continues along those lines, is actually, I think, going to bring about a sea change, if you will, and a general improvement, and maybe people will learn from each other, just what success that type of approach has brought to companies.
Yeah, we can certainly go into stories that show that and explain that. But you mentioned a few concerns. I was wondering if you could talk us through some of these concerns and how those get solved as you move towards this comprehensive solution, look at the entire process.
Yeah, so I have a simple answer and a complex answer, so I'll give you both. So I think back, anybody who's been doing this for a long time, think back many years. There was a big drive on by Treasury to get people to stop sending checks and to pay by ACH. And there are all sorts of methods that they use to convince people to do that, discounting, and if you pay me electronically, I'll give you an extra 3 days to pay, and things of that nature. And that was all well and good. It got the cash into the company, it got the payment into the company, but it didn't really necessarily improve the cash position, because it actually complicated the process of posting those transactions. So in some cases, it took longer to post transactions because it had gone to electronic. I think people are doing, to be quite honest, I think low interest or no interest rate environment improved the drive there to not necessarily force people to pay you sooner, but to pay you smarter. So about 5-10 years ago, there was more of a drive on to focus on the data. And I know there are all sorts of initiatives. We're not going to get into that today, but initiatives to derive common data elements used for payables and receivables. But there was a focus away from how do I pay into what information you're sending me. I mean, information is king again, partly because of interest rates and partly because of AI. But this concern about getting the money in the door, but also making it available by being able to post it. And I think a lot of things have changed, behaviors have changed, and I think the focus on I don't need to solve just my problem, I need to solve our problem has helped there. From an AR perspective, there's a drive on automation, but again, some of that automation actually makes things harder to post. So what many companies are doing is focusing on how they receive information, how they view information, and how they can actually incorporate things like artificial intelligence and just other automation routines to get those transactions posted automatically to the highest level. I know we're going to talk a little bit about straight-through processing. That's a concept that I think needs some work. There are companies that think straight-through processing is if the money lands in the account, it went through straight through. Not really the case. But the other concern is how many errors do some of these automation routines create, and how long how long does that go on? So if I make a mistake today and I don't correct it quickly, and I know I said this a bit earlier, that problem is going to just compound over time and become a serious customer service issue. But I think a lot of work has been done. There are a lot of solutions out there now that using AI, and specifically artificial intelligence, and specifically can actually learn behaviors and post those transactions more accurately and allow that staff to not focus on manually entering things, but dealing with the exceptions. There are still going to be exceptions. People are going to short pay. They're going to, type in the wrong invoice number, things, all those silly little things that happen. But I think there are solutions out there that can actually improve and reduce the amount of time spent on that. And we have plenty of examples. If we have time later, I can talk about some stories. I'm all about stories. As anybody who's listened to me before knows, I like my stories. Process can help to a certain degree, and I think collaboration between the two organizations helps towards that process. I think that also one of the potential solutions is coming up with a common set of reporting elements, so that we're all looking at the same things and potentially understanding how it affects each of our organizations, to give that visibility, the same visibility to everybody, because there are different areas within the company that might be able to help resolve some of those issues, the short pays, the disputes, things of that nature. We tend to always focus on our own, I got to solve my own problem, and not relying on others who could potentially provide good value in that solution. I've gone on long enough, I think.
It's been some good discussion there on a few of these items. When you talked about it's about data, you talked about AI. This idea of hey, if we move things more electronically, people are going to pay sooner, and treasuries sometimes is like, we don't want to pay any sooner. And so we don't care about automation as well. And I don't think that's just a suboptimal view. That's a big consulting word, right? I think that's a wrong view. Just because you've automated something doesn't mean you have to pay people earlier. You can still pay when it's due, but now you have the ability to pass the data and the information sooner, so there's less feedback loops. Let's say for AR contacting the AP groups, when are we going to get paid? We got paid? What is this for? There's no detail. We went from a check and list that had all the details to maybe it came across through an ACH, and maybe our AR group wasn't set to read it, digitally read it and post from that. And so the idea of this end-to-end view, what data comes across, ask some of those questions. Who else needs that data? The value transfer may be focused on AR for posting or relieving the receivable, maybe a focus for Treasury, for what our liquidity is. But some of the data may go into analytics groups, may go into how you can improve your forecast from the accounts receivable side. There's so many uses for that. It could even feed to a bank reconciliation group in addition to the posting area. So when you think about this end-to-end view for data and transfers, this really matters. And you do tell a lot of stories, and they're good stories, and there's learning there with how we move value, how we move money, how we support not only efficiency but liquidity and visibility to that. I think those are really, really crucial aspects, Rick. So let's go to our second poll question. Our first one had 2. This one has a single one, so that brings us up to 3. Accounts receivable systems. How many systems do you use for accounts receivable? That's everything from billing to cash application to ERP. It could be, credit checking as well. Select one of those and hit submit. We have, I think we're right around 100 people typing the word deluxe. So I think we need about 50 more. Brian is rapidly calculating those numbers. I should have said 200, but if you guys would just type deluxe, we'll get those numbers out to everybody. So that's fun. So multiple AR systems, Rick, means more complexity. Yeah. Right? If I'm receiving stuff into 6 different systems, I'm getting that information through a bank, through multiple methods of paying. I've got to post to it. I probably don't want to commingle those through a single account because I've got to post to multiple areas. So it adds some complexity, but that's the environment many, many companies live in because they've acquired a company who's acquired a company who's acquired a company. We're always in this, we're going to rationalize our accounts down, but it's going to take a long time. Now, there it is. That's perfect. So
that's encouraging.
Rick, about 1 in 6 have a single system. 2 to 3, about half, and then we've got 24, about a quarter are 4, 5, 6 or more, and not applicable. Maybe it's a bank or maybe other ones. So we're in good shape there. Any comments on that? But before we do that, we do have enough people typing the word deluxe. We're over 150 in the different channels that it comes in. So thank you for sending those in. We're glad you like data. We love data, and Rick loves stories the most. Rick, any thoughts on the?
But I've never met a piece of data or a survey response that I didn't like. I may not like what it says, but I like it. I'm actually quite surprised because if you think about what we're saying it covers here, having more than half of the respondents say it's 1, 2, or 3 is really just alarming to me, positively so. You mentioned about mergers and acquisitions. I've run into companies that use multiple systems, 6 or more systems, and not because of mergers and acquisitions, but because they allow their business units to do things on their own, which we all know that's not a sustainable situation. I mean, Deluxe has gone through a major consolidation because of all of our acquisitions many years ago. We finally kind of did that incorporation. So for whatever the reason is, it really isn't sustainable to continue to use multiple systems if you can, and I understand, there's budget issues and priority issues, but it's really not a sustainable thing. So I'm actually very encouraged to see these results. Because if you think about, 4 or 5 is really not a terrible number considering everything we're saying that we're trying to cover as used for AR. So yeah, I'm quite intrigued by these.
Excellent. Thanks everybody for responding to the poll questions. This is a complex chart in some ways. Rick, I'd like you to demystify or give us a guide through this. What is why do we have a flow chart that kind of wraps back and forth all the way down to the end?
Because that's kind of how it happens, right? I mean, and actually I think the design is appropriate for what we're talking about. I will say that, this is really like worst case scenario more than anything. Because if you think about it, you could really go right from when will we get the money to payment. Mm-hmm. Does that happen often? I hope it happens more often than we sometimes think it does. But this really is a very complicated process. So if you think about it, the customer places the order, sales or someone then is going to confirm that order. Eventually, because depending on what business you're in, it may not happen quickly. The order will be fulfilled and the shipment will be made. In typical fashion, once that shipment is started, the invoice is generated. Then Treasury is trying to figure out when is that money coming in, because it's a combination, not just this one order, of course. So trying to juggle how much money and when, what day will all this money come in. So they have all their forecasting models and things like that. So they're taking input. So back to the comment earlier about how important data, the same data is used by everybody. It's used a little differently though. And then, so that's how much and when. And then AR is of course concerned about when will we get the money, but they're also a little concerned about will I be able to post the money? Because depending on how it comes in, that would be easier or harder. And then this middle section where we run into something that happens more often than we like, but there's a dispute. Now the dispute could be there's something wrong with the goods, or somebody is taking an unauthorized deduction. I mean, it could be just about anything. So dispute isn't necessarily the goods were damaged or it's not what I ordered or things like that. That's just one of many reasons for these disputes. But then AR plus others within the organization are typically involved in this dispute resolution, depending on what the dispute is all about. Hopefully the information on the payment, whether it's disputed or not, is what is expected. That's a big problem when we talk about AR. When will we get the money, but will I be able to post it? Once the payment is in, AR is trying to post those payments, which is the what is this for? We find this is an awkward step because the customer may include what's needed to post those transactions. They may use a PO instead of an invoice number. They may use their own number that, of course, the company has no idea what those numbers are for. So that's, the most complicated part of AR's job is this cash application and posting it accurately and easily. And then the confirmation. The successful cash application hopefully goes through the first time, but it may actually then go back through that dispute loop. So this is a complicated chart, but it could actually include multiple loops there at the bottom portion. But this is really pretty much depicts the life of Treasury and AR, somewhat simplified, amazingly enough.
It is, why are we showing it back and forth? Well, it's a limitation on the screen. How many, how wide can we place this large linear process that recycles a bit? So if we could go like 4 times as wide, we could make it long. But a couple things to note as you're looking at this, you see the colors, you see customers, this orange or goldenrod color, you can see that at the bottom. Those are the activities there, and you can see the company in the blue. But also notice you have in the company, you've got sales, fulfillment, treasury, accounting and finance, and AR. So if we widen this list out and we put a broader swim lane for customer, a broader swim lane for company, we could have subsets of swim lanes for AR, for treasury, for accounting and finance, for fulfillment. We could put all those together, and that shows how many areas are involved in the cash conversion process. And this, when there's something that breaks the process, or there's an issue or an exception, we call those defects, right? Someone has to go to another area to fix. You invoiced wrong. You sent the information in improperly. You didn't include data, so nobody could have posted it. Now they've contacted you by phone or by email, asked you for details on it. All of those represent broken processes or defects. Those all make it very difficult to scale. It certainly ruins efficiency. And so I'd love to do this in a micro size, but nobody could read it. A complete set of swim lanes across, the back and forth and some of the loops, just so you can see it. Because when you when you review this and when you consider how many of those swim lanes are happening, how many cycle backs occur, it's like, okay, it really makes sense to look at the overall process, because when we look within a section, we break the overall process by, we're flinging stuff down because I'm not the one getting the calls. They're calling someone else. What did you pay for, or whatever else is going on? So those are, really appreciate you stepping through all of that, Rick. And we wish we could have a screen that was 7 times as wide.
Right. And there are probably organizations that even aren't depicted here as well. So it gets even worse.
Awesome. So now we have a macro view and a detailed view, and this is like simplified. It's like sometimes I refer to the fallacy of the line. And if you draw 2 pictures, you got 2 rectangles and you got a line through it. It could be like me and the store, and I go to the store and there's a line, and so it's like I just walk across the street. And then we have another picture that looks the same, but it's me and the moon, and I've got an arrow. And it's like, well, getting to the moon is not just walking across the street. It requires, whatever, talking to Elon Musk or working for years and years to get those things in order. But it still shows a simple context. So the macro view is this simplified, going to the store, but the detailed view, that's where there's a lot of challenges. So maybe you could step us through that and help us understand what moon we're going to, or if we're going to the store.
I like that analogy. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just stick with the macro view, that would make life so much easier. But even the detailed view, some of the things that we've listed here as within those details, there's probably 4 or 5 other arrows that would be alongside this arrow. This is really focusing on payment type, if you will. I think the comment you made, the comment earlier, Craig, about you used to send me a check, now you send me electronic payment, check and list. I think back to several years ago where people were converting from. I don't think people realized that in many cases, getting a check payment, the outsource provider, whether it was a bank or a third party who was processing those lockbox payments, was probably doing data capture for you. So, that was a nice, easy process that people got used to. Those postings went pretty smoothly, and then disrupting that by making them electronic payments where the data was either disassociated or came in a format that you couldn't read, actually was a step back. But checks, as much as we keep saying check is dead, it's not. It's still dying, but it's not dead. Check, especially in the small business world, is still the most common payment type. And there are all sorts of issues with processing checks. RTP adds an extra level of complexity. We talked earlier about Treasury needing to forecast on a more frequent basis, even intraday. Well, real-time payment kind of ups the ante there, and now it becomes a continuous thing during the day, if you will, for Treasury to figure out their position. Once we figure out all the issues about getting the RTP data in closer to real time than it may be in some institutions. Check and list is still a problem. It's just a hard thing to post, ACH with no detail or with detail by disassociation. There are all sorts of challenges there. Virtual cards present a whole different layer of problems, especially if someone mails that virtual card to a lockbox, which creates all sorts of disasters. So this is, talking about the details around making a payment. We could probably add many, many things to this, but the day of the life of processing inbound payments, you almost have to these days look for a solution that incorporates artificial intelligence, but specifically even machine learning, so that the intelligence actually continues to get smarter in order to deal with all these things. There are solutions out there, several solutions out there that don't even, you don't even need to tell it what to do. It will know what to do with each of these payment types. It just makes life easier, and also amps up the accuracy issue. One of the things we worry about from a cash application perspective is accuracy and speed, right? So speed, if you automate it in a way, if you automated the speed, you get the speed, but the accuracy only comes if you're doing it smartly, and you need to use tools that actually know how to process these transactions. But again, the complication is much greater than it appears just on this list.
Yeah.
It's almost infinite.
The Treasury likes to say cash is king. Sometimes we say it's the whole royal family, but if you focus just on moving money and you don't include the information that's necessary, let's say you're an AP area or you're transferring stuff and the other group doesn't know what to do to post it, now you create this ripple effect. Cash may be king, but there's a lot of other people in the kingdom that need information, they need data, they need to be able to operate effectively, or you can't relate well. And so I just appreciated how you talked through and stepped through that.
Well, and the last thing I just wanted to add there, is this is why it's so important to include the customer in the dialogue. They're the ones who are going to be impacted most. If you make a mistake, it impacts them the most. So working with your customers to figure out a way that they can help you, because they're ultimately helping themselves. And that's, I think, the biggest value in including the customer in any kind of automation dialogue. Sorry.
No, it's great. So that brings us to our third poll slide with 2 poll questions. For those of you who are keeping track, as well as for those who aren't, this is a total of 5 different questions. These are 2 stacked, they're single choice. So the first one is, do you measure your straight-through processing to auto-assign? In other words, it gets the money to the individual client. The second question is, do you measure your straight-through processing to auto-apply? That is, the cash is not just applied to the customer, but to the individual invoice. So assigned and applied. Assigned to the customer or applied down to the individual's customer invoice. Do you measure that? So we're just trying to see how many people measure different elements of straight-through processing. I'm really, really looking forward to seeing how this comes out. And so we do like being able to stack up some questions, Rick. So we have 5 questions we're asking. We just love the data. It's good to see. I know a lot of people really want to get the data, from this large audience. So it's really helpful. So, all right. The auto assign 36%, 21%. So really about 3 to 2, yes to no. Unsure is a pretty high percentage.
Yeah.
Maybe that's homework for people to do on that. When we get down to the next level, to auto apply, it looks like there's a little bit of a fall off there. In that same thing is same percentage as yes, a little bit higher no. They're not applying it to the individual. They're not measuring the application of those funds down to the individual invoice level. Yeah, good information.
Yeah. That's good to see. I mean, I expected the number to be, decent on the auto apply, sign rather. Because, many companies that I've talked to, that's their, as long as I can apply it to the customer and I don't have a whole, credit limit issue and things of that nature, it does resolve some potential down the road customer service issues. So it's important, but you really do need to apply it at the invoice level in order to accurately reflect that particular customer's position with you.
Perfect. All right. So this gets back, Rick, to the optimizing the whole. This is really a core theme from our discussion and from many of our times talking. So why don't you start us off? If there's there might be a few things I want to pop in at the end, but why don't you take it away?
Sure. I do have to admit, as we've been talking and as I look at this slide now, I think there are two things missing from the parties that can help. One is not going to be surprising, is customers. Didn't think of that until after we had our conversation here. And the other one is other internal colleagues. And I'll talk about this a little more detail when we do the wrap up. But I think tapping into other resources within the company, even if they have nothing to do with treasury or accounts receivable, but working with other leaders within the organization that may have projects, that may have some expertise that you can tap into. I think we tend not to look internally enough. I mean, I find the banks that I've worked for, we didn't do a good job of it in many cases. So it's just something I would mention. Also don't forget to tap into your colleagues because they may have some good ideas and some good answers. But of course, this is a fairly comprehensive list. Of course, your bankers are a good source of information. I think a lot of companies, especially smaller companies, tend to go to their bankers first. I know when I had a small business, the first person I would ever call was the banker because, that's what they were there for. So bankers, other providers, it's kind of hard. Providers and fintechs partners could be the same thing in some situations and not in others. There are all sorts of advisors and consultants out there. I'll let you go into the more detailed discussion there, but all these are important once you add customer and internal resources, I think. Those are the overlooked ones in my mind.
Yeah, those are good. There's so much in here that we could spend a lot of time on, all the parties, and I appreciate you noticing that we didn't have customers on there, which is quite interesting, so we could continue to expand this slide. But Deluxe is obviously a provider. Strategic Treasurer is a connectivity consultant, a process consultant as well. So we're coming from those angles as well. But this idea of you're making changes, or you want to make changes to a process to move it to a much more, let's say, modern footing that reflects newer formats, newer methods of receiving funds and information, feeding those into systems that can reconcile, that can post and relieve data, can also support some of the analytics that Rick talked about. And so those need to be looked at as well. And I think the idea, too, is what you need in an organization to keep something running, that staffing level may be, you may be appropriately staffed for that. Many organizations don't have the resources to make all those changes on their own because, bringing in new technology, looking through the different processes, sometimes it's very helpful to have other resources come in to help look at those, identify where changes need to be made, help to make those changes, and then they become much easier to adopt for an organization because most organizations staff themselves for, more static activity with a small bit of project work. And I think that's important when we think about how do we optimize the whole, getting those views that are beyond just our area and making sure we're moving forward to the end-to-end, all our customers.
I think, one of the biggest values that many of these parties can provide is what went wrong in other situations so they can advise, missteps that they've seen. But what I would say is in looking for solutions and tapping into these parties, I would recommend, we talked about data. Everybody needs the data and they may use it differently, but I think focusing on that in these conversations can be very helpful. Identifying how different parts of the company use the same data elements differently, but also then thinking about advanced analytics and the ability to, so when I talk about forecasting and a de-emphasizing of DSO and more focus on specific customers, looking at the payment behaviors of specific customers over a period of time can help you identify potential problems before they happen. So it's just one of my final advices that I just thought of. So.
That's great. So some of the final thoughts. I'll start us off, and maybe you could do 2/3 of the work here, Rick. So concerns and KPIs. There are different priorities. There can be different measurements and standards, key performance indicators, different goals, pressure on different points. Be aware that that's a reality, and then work towards resolving these by considering the entire process. So it ends up being a balancing out of things. It's not only Treasury's goals or KPIs. It's not only accounts receivable or credit or AP or the procurement group, but work towards resolving these as we look at the entire process so that it's balanced and measurable.
Yeah. So I know I harp on this end to end to end to end to end to end to end. But I do believe it's important and can provide great value. I think I saw an interesting survey result that on the AP side identified one of the top 3 pain points being invoicing problems. And I truly believe that the bulk of those invoicing problems are because there's something broken in the accounts receivable chain of the counterparty. Anyway, but the companies that actually collaborate within the organization to come up with these solutions and share their pain, I think it starts with the sharing of the pain. And once you understand, and once you have an intervention, if you will, and understand each other's pains, it makes it easier to come up with some solutions that will help everyone. I mean, maybe not everyone, but at least the group that you're working within. And then you're not alone. I mean, we just talked about looking for help from outside sources or inside sources. That's an important thing. I think we've seen great successes where people have reached out to other people that they know within the company and said, I know you had a similar situation. The details might have been different, but how did you get approval for this project? What did your business case look like? Even something simple like that, getting help from within the organization. But there are all sorts of people, all sorts of organizations out there that you can tap into for their expertise. Just don't try to fix it yourself.
Excellent. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, everybody, for listening, paying attention. We'll flip it back over to Brian. There's a few quick announcements and some resources for you. Thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Craig. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. The CTP credits, today's webinar slides, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within 5 business days. And for more on improving payments, be sure to listen to the Treasury Update Podcast, episode 299 with Deluxe by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.